Hey guys, it's Alexander Williamson here with The Secret History Living in Your Aquarium. Today I want to tell you some amazing stories and some interesting information about evolution, history, where our fish came from, where your fish came from, and some facts. We'll call them facts for now because this is what science knows as of now, but science is always subject to change as soon as new information seems to fit the path of past information and follows the scientific method. But for now, they're facts. So, what I want to start off with is by telling you something that may blow your mind. Alright, guys. Almost all the living creatures in the sea right now, living creatures that are fish, that is, originated in fresh water. Yep. So they were in freshwater and then moved to the sea. Then they evolved in the sea. But let's stop there for a sec. Because before all that, before dinosaurs, before mammals, before all of the critters on land, there were protofish living in the saltwater, in the oceans. Well, some of those fish went to land, went to maybe even walking on land, and then crawling into water. Others may have been trapped in areas like the Mediterranean that, it wouldn't be the Mediterranean. I'm giving an example of a body of water today that has an exit at the Strait of Gibraltar that could easily, over 1 million years be closed off, or, 10 million years. And you'd have a large body of water with all these species still in it. So that happened when we had different continents, when we had one major continent and just pieces of it moving around in Pangea. That's what it was called. So this major continent had water. At first it was very dry in the center, because when you have a giant mass of land and not a ton of mountains because of the continental uplift and things like that going on, hadn't really fired up to the level that we have it now, or we've had it the last 300 million years. But as the Earth cooled and settled down, water blankets the Earth. There's even a period that rains for 2 million years straight, and it's kind of a crazy period that we can go into another time. But after this, the edges of the continent, and there are several other islands and chunks off the continent, but that is where most fish would live, most animals would live, is in that zone that's 30 meters or more shallow. So 100 feet-ish or more shallow than that. Like, the deeper you go, the less fish there are. The more open you go, the less fish there are. So, why is this fact so amazing, so mind-blowing to me? Well, it's because 98.9% of all the water habitat in the world is in the ocean, okay? And the rest is in lakes, rivers, and we're not counting the stuff that's locked into glaciers right now. But lakes, rivers, streams, creeks, whatever you want to call it, fresh water that is habitable to fish doesn't make up much of what the world has to offer. So it is really, really astonishing that something went from the open ocean way back before it was a fish, when it was another creature related to fish. Fish hadn't come about yet. It evolves, and actually there are a few fish that stayed in the marine world, it looks like. So one is the infamous Coelacanth, which was a fish that we thought was extinct. It was in the fossil record as this ancient fish, and in the 1930s one was caught, I think it was off the coast of South Africa. Somebody caught one of these ancient dinosaur-looking fish, very bony, just it looks like an old fish. So there's coelacanths, there's two kinds, but they're the last of their type, And then we've also got lungfish, bony fish, and lobed fish. Now, these make up a tiny fraction of the fish that are in the salt water. So 24,500 fish are considered Rayfinned fish that originated on freshwater, on land, in fresh water. So all the Rayfinned fish, and that's fish from your betta to you know, a goldfish, to angelfish, to tangs, to you know, just most fish. Okay, so these fish have a name, and that's actinopterygians. So it's hard to say. Actinopterygians. Hard to say, but it means Rayfinned fish. Means that they have bone structure underneath their scales and their flesh, and that supports their. Basically, it's like a skeleton, even though it may be cartilage, or it could be bone too. And then we've got oddballs like, you know, mud skippers and lungfish and eels and things like that, some of which are related and aren't. But that's not important. What I want you to understand here is that in the fresh water, there are way more species per capita, I'll say. So for how much fresh water there are way more species than in the salt water. So in the salt water, we have 58% of the world's species of fish that we know of, okay? And this is assuming these numbers may change. This is kind of what scientists are projecting, like, well, we probably know about 80% of what's out there. So if the numbers and the percentages are a little off, like, pardon me, the whole point is to nail this home, what I'm talking about. And that is that there is 10,000 times more saltwater habitat than there is freshwater habitat right now. Now that changes with glaciation and things like that, and as the earth gets warmer or cooler, but still, think about that. There's 10,000 times more places for fish to hang out and live, yet only 58% of all the fish are there? That's really odd. So let's think about that a little bit. What does that mean, and why do we get such diversity and such cool freshwater fish? This is why I love freshwater fish. Plus, I don't have to mix the salts and get all the things right. So, not that it's rocket science, but I just think it's easier to keep freshwater fish. And I really like growing plants more than I do coral, so that's another piece of it. Now, saltwater does have quite a bit more life in the form of plankton, coral, you know, little cephalopods, and you know, you've got everything from octopus to just all sorts of stuff out there in the saltwater. So I have to give it that. But we are talking about fish. We're talking about the fish that we keep in our aquariums too, and 41% of them are found in fresh water. Some places, like the Amazon, hold over 6,000 species in one river basin that we know of. This is mind-blowing to me also. We're probably going to find more. And you find fish that are freshwater fish in places like the puphole fish in Death Valley. It is a fish that lives in a little bubbling stream of water in the hottest place in the world, and yet there is a fish out in the middle of the desert. There is a pupfish there. It's just, fish will get to and survive in the craziest places. Even up in the Arctic, you have things like char, whitefish. You know, you've got freshwater fish, salmon, that will inhabit a habitat. And speaking of salmon, that brings up 1% of the fish, which are those who go between freshwater and saltwater. And that is certain things, you know, like salmon, certain eels, a lot of these creatures spawn and go back and forth, and this actually includes fish that don't necessarily, they don't want to be going back and forth always. This is the 1% includes fish that are just capable of it. So a bull shark would be included. Even though a bull shark lives out at sea, it can go up a river 800 miles and come back a year later unscathed as far as we know. So, out of all these fish in the ocean, another crazy thing that I want to point out is that today we still have 3 living relatives of probably all of those actinopterians. Take 2. So hard to say. Actinoptergians, and that is the Rayfinned fish, the 24,000 species, have all pretty much come from 3 different lines of fish, of which there are living fossils, as we call it, because they're still so closely related to the group of fish that lived during this time that we can kind of see these characteristics. Of these 3 fish, all the saltwater fish we can thank for one oddball, which is the Polyopterus senegalis, and these are the polyopter forms. So if you've seen bichers before, they look like little dragons. They're like little lizard-looking fish. Some of them actually get big, but they're popular in the aquarium trade, and that is one of the living relatives of what went back out into the sea. And we're talking hundreds of millions of years ago. So, you know, when you look at it, there was something related to a fish that lived out in the sea, came onto land, then came and made its home in all the lakes and oceans across the land, and then either swam back out, or, you know, the geology shifted and it was able to come back out. Things like lakes weren't landlocked anymore, perhaps. Who knows? But the reason we have all these things is thanks to these 3 fish. So let me finish up the other 2. So the other 2, we have Chondorostii. And so, I'm butchering that. I'm sorry, guys. I'm no good at some of these names. But the Chondrostii is a Chinese, Australian, or U.S. paddlefish. So another kind of weird looking fish, right? If you've seen them, they've got the long nose with a flat paddle on it, and they've got teeth that looks kind of like an alligator gar in on the way out to that paddle. They're long, they've got like a wide kind of stingray looking head, but that's another one of the relatives that we still find in the freshwater today. And in the fossil record, it looks extremely similar to these, which is really cool. Now the last are known as ameiforms, or Ameiacava is the living one today, and I just had an opportunity to see these in Florida. And that is the bowfin. That's what we call the fish that's still living. And it kind of looks like a lungfish or an electric eel, a little bit like a catfish still too. But it has one big fin that's on the top and bottom. The main one's on the bottom. And it moves kind of like a ghost knife fish, if you've seen those. So it's a really cool fish. And it's a really ancient fish, and you can tell just by looking at it, man, this thing evolved to do what it does, and it hasn't changed in a long time. So we've got those 3 fish, and this was all figured out by Greta Vega and John Weens from the Royal Society. They published this paper about 7 years ago, and they did everything from DNA tests to examining existing papers. And it's kind of the final paper that really locks in this theory that there were lots of theories of where fish came from and all this sort of thing. But this kind of seals the deal. It's kind of the last paper needed. It really puts a lot of pieces together and satisfies most of the questions. Now, as I said, there are some weird oddballs. Even though 99% of the fish out in the ocean can be traced back to a freshwater fish, there are some weirdos like the coelacanth that have probably been in the ocean the entire time. Now, why is it that we would have so much more diversity per gallon in fresh water? Well, this is one you guys can probably figure out. And that is, well, it's hard to live in a lake. It's hard to live in a river. Things change. You can run out of water. You can have problems with overfeeding. You can evolve so well that you eat everything in your niche. That maybe you are the apex predator and you are the limiting factor if you're a big fish in a little pond. And you start to get other fish that will eat things like algae, or maybe they just eat off the bottom, or maybe they only eat things floating on the top of the water. And they evolve very specific mechanisms for doing this. Probably the most famous of which are cichlids, because cichlids actually have two jaws, or a false jaw, I should say. They have one on the inside of their throat that allows them to masticate or chew, break down things, or hold things. And then they've got another jaw that is the lips part, the fleshy part with the jaw, that can also eat. Now, because of this, it allows them to go from everything to carnivores, to fish that eat nuts or berries or things that fall off trees, to chew on wood, to eat scraping algae with that hard bone on the pharyngeal flap on the inside. So they've been able to take over in Africa, Lake Victoria, Lake Tanganyika, Lake Malawi, all the rift lakes they've been able to get into, and in a matter of several million years, they have taken up every niche possible pretty much. And when there's a new one, even when like something like Nile tilapia gets introduced and decimates the populations of certain fish, well, a new niche is gonna open up, and they will evolve. And already we're seeing some of the species that we saw from the 1950s categorized, and we're finding, oh, this is a new species. Oh wait, genetically it's the one from the 50s. How is it evolving in like 20 generations to look completely different, from the markings to its jaw form to its eyes to its hunting strategy? It's really amazing, and it probably has to do with epigenetics, which we'll get into in another video because it's just too much to cover. But I want you to think about why that the land-based water is, I know that sounds funny, so let's say the inland water has been able to survive and produce so many different fish over time, whereas the oceans have kind of had a hard time producing quite the same diversity. And it may be that over time there's been more diversity in the oceans. However, say an asteroid hits, say there's a massive eruption underwater and the pH changes for a ginormous region. And back when the Earth was still cooling down, I mean, it's still cooling down. We still have volcanoes, right? But back then you could have things like sulfur and ash going up into the air. And only the fish that live down really deep, which make up less than 4% of the fish in the ocean, only 13% of the fish in the ocean live in open water. The rest all live right by the shore, in shallow water that gets sunlight. And that makes up 78% of the fish live in shallow water. So there's a little overlap. Some will live there and they'll go out to open water part of the time. But most of them live in reefs, in places like that. And where do we find the greatest degree of speciation going on in the saltwater? Off the coast of Australia, off the coast of Papua New Guinea, in these areas that are just pocketed with islands, just everywhere. They're dotted with islands, with reefs, with land, with problems with tsunamis, hot weather. Tropical weather seems to be one that really encourages speciation also, because at a certain degree, when it gets too cold or too hot for that matter, you only get these kind of bizarre fish like the desert pupfish, or like a fish that can suspend its animation and freeze for most of the year and really slow its metabolism in places that are too cold, too dark, whatever it may be. Now, the deep ocean has some really interesting creatures, but I'm talking about what's in our aquariums more, and that's what fascinates me right now. So I just wanted to point out that it's kind of ironic that through all the extinctions, you know, they say this is the 6th, maybe the 7th, depending on how you count, great extinction going on right now because of people, because of loss of habitat for these creatures. But why do we have the species that we do and the incredible diversity, the things like, you know, venoms, toxins, really cool adaptive methods of locomotion, lungs? Okay, we're related to a fish that first came out of the water with lungs. All the tetrapods that came later, all the four-legged creatures, four appendage creatures, I should say, came from a fish that breathed. Okay, maybe we shouldn't call it a fish because it was a ancestor to it, but it is adversity, it is difficulty, it is extinction, it is stress that causes speciation and a niche to fill. So when you have 5,000 lakes in one country, each lake has the opportunity to have a different solution to the problem of how do I survive, you know, and looking at the great concept of evolution and you know, survival of the fittest, I suppose. It's not quite as simple as that. Now we're learning, but essentially, if you can make yourself at home and utilize that niche, you get to pass on your genes because you've survived. Then your babies survive. The ones that can't, don't. And so in lakes and things, maybe one fish tries eating algae. Maybe another tries eating little fish that are also in the lake. Another one gets really big and starts eating its old relatives that chose to go eat the algae. And maybe another fish decides to clean the fish that is really big. You know, there's all these opportunities out there. And in the ocean, you really have a couple types of environment. And that's hot water, medium temperatured water, and Arctic water, really. And then you've got below the sunlight range and where light enters the spectrum in the ocean. Other than that, you've got coastal reefs and shallow water, and you've got open water, and combinations of all those. Now, inland, what do we have? We have rivers, we have creeks, we have seasonal streams, we have flash flooding plains through slot canyons and through deserts. We have year-round lakes. We have ancient lakes that used to be seas. They used to have salt water, you know, the Black Sea, the Aral Sea, the Caspian. These places that are dying now, some of them. But they are all amazing opportunities for life. And it's just incredible to me to watch how things have changed. And maybe just a color change is the difference. Maybe just making a fish a little more squat so it can fit under a rock and get that worm that the other fish couldn't get. It's really incredible. And feeling the fact that the diversity all around us has occurred because of adversity, because it was difficult, because most prototypes of creatures didn't make it, reminds me that when we're having a hard time, every time we get through it and make it, we learn, we grow, we're better, we can teach others. And, you know, it's just another one of the lessons that fish keeping has taught me. So I hope this video was a little bit interesting to you guys. I apologize on butchering some of the pronunciations and things like that. But it's really fascinating stuff. Go back and look at some of the pre-fish ancestors. I might make another video showing all these fish and things. But for now, I just, I was reading about it, thinking about it, and I wanted to get it out to you guys, to share this with you guys, because it's really fascinating. It's just, it makes my mind go a million miles an hour thinking of all the beauty and diversity that is all around us. So, if you enjoy these videos, the history, evolution, biology type videos, and I've earned it, please consider subscribing to the channel and clicking that little bell notification so you know when there's new stuff like this and stuff like the giveaway. We just gave away over $1,000 worth of stuff to viewers like you guys. So thank you so much for joining me, for sharing in my excitement. And if you really want to help the channel and help me kind of get better gear, show you more stuff, more places, have better sounding audio and better lighting, things like this. I'm constantly trying to work on that stuff, but I can't do it without you guys, and Patreon is really one of the best ways to do that. Even $1 a month really helps. And other than that, if you want help 24/7 with your fish, pledge $5 and I will respond as quick as I can. $10, I will give you my cell phone number. So if you're having an emergency, I'm an insomniac. Hopefully, I can respond and help you if your tank's leaking or if your fish has some symptoms you need help with. So that's one little perk I'd like to offer. Plus, I've also got, you can get first dibs on batches of things I'm breeding, or illustrations and some of the merchandise that is coming out soon. So thank you guys. Thanks for watching. Thanks for joining me. And remember, adversity is what made us what we are today, physically, emotionally, evolutionarily. So wear that with pride, wear those scars with pride, and hopefully this hobby, these videos, thinking about stuff like this can help you get through the tough times and make you smile at the wonder all around us. Thank you so much. I'm Alex Williamson, and this is The Secret History, living in my aquariums. Bye, guys.